I'm going to start slow, almost like I'm sitting beside you in the dark, leaning just a little too close, and whispering the story the way Officer Ramirez once told it. Soft, steady, like someone who hasn't slept in a long time. So, have you ever felt something in the dark that shouldn't be there? Something breathing where there shouldn't be lungs? Ramirez used to say that the night he drove into the vanished town, it felt like stepping inside someone else's nightmare, like the world had blinked wrong for a second, and he got stuck in the wrong version of reality. People said 300 residents simply disappeared in one night. No screams, no footprints, no doors left open. Just an empty town with dinner plates still warm and TV screens still glowing. Ramirez was one of those cops who didn't believe in anything supernatural. He believed in reports, in paperwork, in reasons. He'd tell you he'd seen enough real human stupidity that ghosts didn't scare him. Yeah, well, that confidence lasted until about 10 minutes after he crossed the town's sign. The road was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels manufactured, like sound had been vacuumed out of the air. He joked to himself, great, probably just a blown transformer, or maybe the whole town joined a flash mob and forgot to tell the police. A little dry humor to keep himself awake. But the deeper he drove, the more he felt it, like someone was sitting in the back seat, breathing softly against the glass. He even glanced in the mirror once and whispered, "Not funny," as if he expected someone to answer. No one did, of course. Not yet. His patrol car rolled past the diner, past the gas station, past the little row of houses with their identical porches and wind chimes that weren't moving. Even the air felt paused. And the weirdest part? Every streetlight flickered at the same slow rhythm, like the whole town was exhaling together. He tried to radio dispatch, but all he got was static. A long, slow, whispering static that almost sounded like words if you listened too hard. He didn't. He kept driving until he reached the old cemetery at the edge of town. Now, Ramirez wasn't the spooky cemetery type. He'd been on night shift for years. Cemeteries didn't scare him. They were predictable. The living were the problem. But tonight the gates were wide open, and the ground looked freshly disturbed, like it had been dug and smoothed over again and again. He stepped out of the car, clicked on his flashlight, and whispered, "All right, whoever's messing with the graves, come out now." No one answered. The wind didn't even bother pretending. He walked between the rows, his boots sinking a little deeper than they should, the soil too soft, too fresh. Then he noticed something that made his stomach drop just a little. Every headstone had the same number carved into it, 909. Not names, not dates, not epitaphs, just 909. 3 digits, over and over and over. He swallowed hard, forced a little joke to calm himself. Well, that's economical. Easier for the stonecutter, I guess. But when he shone the flashlight down the line and saw every single grave, every single one was fresh, that humor evaporated pretty fast. 300 graves, 300 mounds, 300 identical markers, all reading 909. And then he heard it, a soft scratching. No, more like fingernails dragging against wood, then a thump, then another, then something that sounded suspiciously like a muffled sob. Ramirez froze. "Hello?" he whispered, because whispering suddenly felt safer than speaking. The scratching got louder, more desperate, like someone was clawing their way up. Impossible. He knew it was impossible. He leaned closer to one grave, put his ear near the mound, not touching it, of course, he wasn't that brave, and heard the unmistakable sound of someone crying beneath the dirt. His breath caught. "No," he muttered. "Nope, nope, nope." And yet he stayed. Because that's what cops do, apparently. Ignore every survival instinct they have. He stepped back, looked around at the graves, and that's when he realized the sound wasn't coming from one grave. It was coming from all of them. Soft cries, nails dragging, someone whispering, "Help," in a voice that didn't sound fully human. Ramirez wasn't a fearful man, but hearing 300 voices beneath the ground, whispering all at once, yeah, that shook him. He forced himself toward the nearest grave, more to prove to himself that it was some kind of trick. Maybe a speaker, maybe kids messing around, something rational. He knelt, dug his fingers into the soil, and began scooping it away. The crying beneath got louder, like whoever was down there could feel his hands moving the dirt. He muttered, "Please don't be a body. Please don't be a body. Please don't be a body." But when the flashlight hit the coffin lid and he pried it open with trembling hands, he didn't find a stranger. He didn't find a corpse that belonged in a morgue. He found himself, his own dead face, eyes half open, mouth slightly parted as if it had been trying to speak before it died. He stared so long he forgot to breathe. His mind just stalled. A dry little whisper escaped him. "Okay, that's new." He stumbled back, nearly fell into another grave, and that's when one of the coffins beneath the dirt spoke, clearer than any of the others. A voice that sounded eerily like his own, but older, more tired, and definitely less alive. "We are not dead yet, but you will be." Ramirez ran. For the first time in his career, he didn't care about protocol, didn't care about anything except getting the hell out. He sprinted back to the patrol car, breath shaking, hands cold, heart pounding in that embarrassing, too loud way hearts do when they sense something ancient is watching. He slammed the door, started the engine, and didn't even look back as he sped through the empty streets. The town felt smaller, like the shadows were closing in, like the houses were leaning just a little closer, listening. When he finally reached the exit road, he exhaled. Too soon, apparently, because as he glanced up at the rearview mirror, hoping to see nothing but road behind him, the screen of his backup camera flickered on. Static, then movement, dark shapes, row after row after row of figures walking slowly toward his car, all matching his height, his build, his posture. 300 versions of Ramirez, dirty, pale, and whispering, stumbling up the road behind him. He didn't dare blink, didn't dare breathe, and somewhere in that soft chorus of dead voices behind him, he heard his own voice whisper, "You shouldn't have opened the grave." Ramirez would later say he didn't remember pressing the accelerator, didn't remember the tires screeching or the car fishtailing on the cracked asphalt, only the feeling that something cold and familiar was brushing the back of his neck as he sped away from those 300 versions of himself, like a warning or a promise. And even though the road ahead was empty, wide open, straight as a ruler cutting through the dark, he couldn't shake the sense that the town wasn't done with him yet, that maybe it wasn't a place at all, but something alive, something that had noticed him in a way the world shouldn't notice anybody. He kept whispering to himself, "Just drive, man. Just drive. Get out. Breathe. Pretend none of that happened." But the more distance he put between himself and the cemetery, the heavier the air inside the car started to feel, like the interior was shrinking, pressing in on him, and the radio crackled even though he'd turned it off, letting out this faint, rhythmic tapping, almost like someone drumming their fingers on the inside of the speaker. He tried to ignore it, muttered a shaky joke like, "Yeah, cool, perfect. Haunted radio? Love that for me." But the tapping got slower, closer, until it sounded like it was right under the dashboard, like something was crawling up through the car's wiring, trying to speak through the static. He gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles went white, breathing through his teeth, whispering, "Don't look down, don't look down, don't." And of course he looked down, because humans are idiots when they're scared. And in the faint glow of the instrument panel, he saw a print in the dust on the dashboard. Not a handprint exactly, but something shaped like his hand, just distorted, stretched at the tips like someone had pulled each finger too long before pressing it there. He jerked his hand back and almost veered off the road, forcing himself to breathe, slow and tense, telling himself it was fatigue, hallucination, too much adrenaline, anything except the truth that those things in the cemetery, those copies of him, might not be stuck in the ground. He finally pulled over near a rusted-out highway motel just outside the edge of the town, the kind of place where the sign flickers, vacancy, even when no one's inside, the air buzzing with old lights and a smell like mildew and forgotten travelers. He didn't want to stop, but he needed a second to think, to wipe the sweat from his face, to calm whatever was shaking inside him. As he sat there, the desert wind brushing across the parking lot, he noticed something odd. The motel office door was open, the bell above it hanging crooked, and there was a single lamp on inside, flickering just enough to cast long shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Ramirez stepped out, calling softly, "Hello? Anyone here?" In that cautious cop tone that means, "Please don't shoot me," and "Please don't be a monster," both at the same time. No answer, just the soft hum of the neon sign. He moved through the office, his flashlight tracing dust on the counter, a cold cup of coffee, a guest book open to a page with no names. Just the number 909 scribbled over and over until the entire sheet was filled with it. He whispered, "Nope, nope, I'm not doing this again." But something in him, curiosity or stupidity, made him flip the page, and on the next one, carved deep through the paper with a shaking hand, were the words, "We saw you open the grave." He felt a chill crawl up his back, and he closed the book slowly like he was afraid it would scream if he slammed it shut. He backed out of the office, turning toward the parking lot, and then froze because, yeah, of course, his patrol car door was open even though he definitely closed it. A soft scraping sound came from inside, rhythmic and slow, like nails dragging over leather. He approached with small steps, whispering to himself, "If this is a raccoon, I swear I'm quitting my job." And when he finally leaned close enough to peek inside, the scraping stopped completely, replaced by a soft, breathy voice, his own voice, whispering, "Don't leave us here." Adrenaline hit him like a punch, and he spun around, heart pounding so loud it felt like someone knocking from inside his chest. And that's when he noticed the motel rooms. All 20 doors swinging open in perfect unison, not blown by the wind but moving like something inside was pushing them slowly outward. He stepped back, whispering. Ramirez didn't remember deciding to move. His body just acted for him, spinning toward the patrol car with a kind of desperate, clumsy urgency, the kind you only see in people who finally realize they're not dealing with anything human anymore. And as he fumbled for the keys with shaking fingers, he could hear the soft, synchronized footsteps of those copies descending from the motel walkway, their movements slow, deliberate, like they were savoring the moment, like they'd been waiting for him to be exactly this scared. He dove into the car, slammed the door, hit the lock, and tried to convince himself that the thin piece of metal separating him from whatever was outside still meant something. Muttering, "Cars stop people, not whatever these things are." But it gave him just enough courage to start the engine, and for a moment he thought he might actually escape. But when he looked through the windshield, he froze. Every single motel door was now filled with a figure shaped like him, rows and rows of Ramirez's, standing completely still, watching him with this silent, unnatural patience. He whispered, "Okay, cool. So that's not horrifying at all," and put the car in reverse, trying not to acknowledge the faint movement he saw on the backup camera, that blurry distortion that had been following him since the cemetery. The tires rolled over cracked pavement, crunching small rocks and debris, and the copies didn't chase him. They just watched, like they knew something he didn't, like he was already too deep inside whatever this nightmare was. Once he reached the edge of the highway, he floored it, the engine whining in protest, headlights cutting through the darkness as the road stretched endlessly ahead. But even as the motel vanished in the distance, he felt this tightening in his chest, like a hand was gripping his lungs, not squeezing exactly, but holding them, testing them. And the farther he got from the town, the more he felt that pressure growing, like something inside him didn't want him to leave. He kept whispering to himself in that shaky, half-sarcastic tone he used when he was trying not to fall apart. "It's fine, man. You're fine. Just a normal night. Super casual, totally not being hunted by yourself." But his breath kept catching, shallow and uneven, and the air inside the car felt thicker, almost liquid, like he was driving underwater. He reached for the radio again out of pure instinct, even though it hadn't worked before. And this time, instead of static, he heard breathing. Not his own, not the calm rhythm of someone listening, but a slow, wet inhale followed by this soft whisper that barely formed words. "You're almost here," which made absolutely no sense because he was leaving the town, not approaching it. He tried to shut the radio off, but it didn't matter. It kept whispering anyway, the voice sliding between the vents, the wiring, the speakers, like it wasn't coming from the radio at all, but from the car itself. He finally snapped, shouting, "What do you want?" And for a second, everything went dead silent, like the world paused, and he almost regretted asking because the voice returned in a tone so calm, so sure, it felt like someone leaning right beside him saying, "We want you to remember." The patrol car suddenly jerked to the left like something had yanked it, tires screeching as he fought the wheel, and he barely managed to keep it from spinning off the road. When he looked through the windshield, he saw something that made his stomach drop. The highway signs, the ones that should have been pointing toward the next town, now read 909, the numbers flickering like they'd been burned into the metal. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, whispered, "No, no, no, that's not real." But the next sign said, "Grave ahead," and the one after that said, "Stop digging." He didn't want to look, but he had to. And in the reflection on the inside of the windshield, he saw the faintest outline of a face behind his shoulder. His own face, staring blankly, lips barely apart, whispering something he couldn't quite hear. He slammed the brakes without thinking, skidding to a halt on the middle of the empty highway, gasping for air as he reached back and swiped at the back seat. But nothing was there. Not a shape, not a shadow, not anything, except the faint smell of dirt, fresh dirt, like the kind he dug through in the cemetery. He sat there for a long moment, engine idling, the world unnervingly quiet. And finally he whispered, "If you're trying to scare me, it's working. Please stop." Which would have been funny if not for the fact that the headlights flickered then, not on and off, but up and down, like the beam was being pulled toward the ground, forcing him to look at what appeared in front of the car. Footprints, freshly formed in the dirt and gravel. Dozens of them, all leading toward the desert, all identical to his own boot prints. He swallowed hard and shook his head, whispering, "Nope, I'm not following those." But as he tried to put the car in drive, the engine sputtered, coughed, and died completely, plunging him back into a silence so deep it felt rehearsed. The radio clicked back on with a soft whisper. Walk. He wanted to scream or cry or laugh hysterically, anything. But instead, he just exhaled slowly, opened the car door, and stepped out into the cool, dry air, the desert stretching out like a dark ocean around him. The footprints led into a patch of scrub and rock, where the land dipped downward, forming a shallow basin he didn't remember being on any map. He followed the prints with small steps, whispering to himself like a scared kid trying to stay brave. Just see what it is. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's a prank. Maybe you're sleeping. But the deeper he went, the colder the air felt, almost unnaturally cold, like walking into a freezer. Soon he saw it, half buried in the center of the basin, illuminated by the pale moonlight, was a single wooden coffin, old, splintered, with the number 909 carved into the lid. He froze, whispering, "No, absolutely not. I'm not touching that." But the coffin lid slid open on its own, slow and silent, revealing nothing inside, just darkness, deep and full and impossibly still. He took a step back, heart pounding, but then something in the coffin moved, like a shadow lifting its head, and a voice, his own voice, exhausted, broken, whispered from inside, "Hurry, we're waking up." And before he could even process what that meant, something grabbed his ankle from beneath the dirt and pulled hard, dragging him toward the open coffin. Ramirez hit the dirt so hard it knocked the breath out of him, the cold hand around his ankle dragging him inch by inch toward that open coffin like it had all the time in the world. And for a second he didn't even scream. He just froze, staring at the lid with 909 carved deep like a wound, whispering to himself, "This is not how my night ends. I refuse to go out like a discount horror cliche." But the grip tightened, tugging harder, pulling him across the gritty ground. And as he clawed at the dirt, he felt something else beneath the soil. Dozens of shapes shifting, slithering, like hands reaching upward but not quite breaking the surface. He kicked wildly, his boot connecting with something solid that gave off a strange, hollow thud, and the hand let go just long enough for him to scramble backward, panting, wiping dirt off his mouth as if it had been trying to swallow him. For a moment the basin was silent, unnervingly silent. Then the coffin lid, still half open, slammed shut with a sound so sharp it echoed through the entire desert like a gunshot, and the ground beneath him trembled in a slow, rolling shiver, like something massive was turning over underground. Ramirez whispered, "Please tell me that was an earthquake," even though he knew damn well it wasn't. And when he looked back toward the highway, his stomach dropped. The patrol car lights were on, even though the engine had been dead, and the headlights were pointed directly at him, illuminating the basin like a spotlight. He swallowed, whispering, "Okay, who turned my car on?" But the answer came immediately, because the driver's side door opened with a slow creak, and a silhouette stepped out, his silhouette, and began walking toward him with that same unnatural gait the motel versions had, except this one moved differently. almost confidently, like it had been doing this longer than he'd been alive. The figure didn't speak at first, just kept walking, each step synchronized with that rumbling beneath the ground, and when it finally came close enough for him to see its face, he felt his skin crawl. Because it wasn't just a copy of him, it was him exactly, down to the tiny scar on his chin and the faint line above his right eyebrow, except its eyes were sunken, almost bruised looking, and its expression carried this exhausted disappointment, like Ramirez had personally let it down. The copy crouched in front of him, tilting its head just slightly, and whispered in a soft, steady tone that sounded too tired to be threatening. "You weren't supposed to run. You were supposed to remember." And Ramirez, trying very hard not to pass out or scream, croaked out, "Remember what? I've never been here before." But the copy smiled in a way that felt wrong, the corners of its mouth stretching a little too far, and whispered, "You have 1,000 times," before reaching out as if to touch his face. Ramirez slapped the hand away with more panic than bravery and scrambled backward, and the copy didn't chase him. It just sighed like a disappointed parent and whispered, "You're waking the others." Right as the ground beneath them split open with a dry, cracking sound, dirt shifted, rocks rolled, and one by one pale hands snapped through the surface, grabbing blindly, followed by faces. His faces, hundreds of them, smeared with dirt, eyes half open like they were still adjusting to the world they weren't supposed to leave. Ramirez staggered back, whispering, "No, no, nope, no thank you," as one of the faces gasped sharply, dragging in a first breath that sounded like someone choking on air, and another one whispered his name in a voice so faint he felt it instead of hearing it. The basin was filling fast, bodies pulling themselves upward, crawling, dragging, twitching like marionettes learning how to move, all wearing his face, all whispering in broken, overlapping words that made his brain feel like it was cracking. "You left us. You dug us up. Why don't you remember? Come back. Sleep." And as they dragged themselves forward, he realized something horrifying. They weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to pull him down with them, into the dirt, into the coffin, into whatever cycle he apparently kept repeating. He stumbled and fell against a rock, scraping his arm, and as he tried to stand again, one of the copies, this one with its jaw slightly unhinged like it had been broken and never reset, reached out and grabbed his wrist, its grip shockingly warm, whispering, "You're one of us." And for a moment, horrifyingly, he felt his own thoughts blur like someone else was trying to rewrite them. Ramirez yelled, ripping his arm free, and ran blindly toward the patrol car, ignoring the way the headlights flickered like they were laughing, ignoring the whispering chorus rising behind him, ignoring the rumbling earth like something huge was waking beneath the basin. He reached the car door, nearly threw himself inside, and slammed it shut with the force of someone who believed, rightly, that the world outside wanted to pull him apart. He hit the lock button, started the engine without understanding how it obeyed him this time, and floored it, the car lurching forward as the copies behind him let out a long, echoing wail that didn't sound like fear or anger. It sounded like disappointment. The desert blurred past him, tears he didn't remember forming streaking down his face, and he kept whispering, "Don't look back, don't look back, don't you dare look back." But when the highway straightened and the trembling ground finally went still, he felt that same cold pressure on his lungs again, heavier now, like a warning or a countdown, and he couldn't help it. He glanced at the rearview mirror. At first, he saw nothing but darkness, just miles of empty highway. But then the mirror flickered, like static on a screen, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, he didn't see the road behind him at all. He saw the inside of a coffin, wood splintering inward, fingernails scraping, someone gasping for air in the dark, someone who looked exactly like him. He blinked hard, and the image vanished, leaving only the empty highway in the mirror, but the radio, dead silent until now, clicked on softly and whispered in his exact voice, calm, steady, almost resigned, "You watched yourself die once. How many times do you think you've done it?" And before he could react, something knocked on the roof of his moving patrol car, once sharply, like someone riding on top. I remember standing there in that dim cabin, my hands shaking just enough that I pretended it was because of the cold, even though the air was warm and still, like the whole forest was holding its breath, listening, waiting for me to make the wrong move. And I swear I kept hearing this faint clicking sound behind the walls, like someone running their fingernails along old wood, slow and patient. And I told myself I'd deal with it later, because right then my mind was stuck on that last face I'd seen in the mirror. The face that wasn't mine. The face that shouldn't have been anywhere except maybe in some old photograph tucked behind a loose floorboard. And I remember thinking, real casual, like people think when they're trying not to panic, okay, so maybe I'm just tired, or mildly losing my mind. Both are valid. But no, the thing in that reflection was real, and the way its mouth had moved slower than the rest of its face, like it was running on a different timeline. That part didn't feel like imagination at all. And the more I stood there replaying it, the more I realized I wasn't scared of the creature itself so much as I was terrified of the fact that it looked almost relieved to be seen, like it had been waiting for someone to notice it, waiting for someone to acknowledge its existence so it could finally step out from the edges of the world where things like that hide. And I don't know what made me do it. Maybe some leftover survival instinct, or maybe pure stupidity. But I followed the clicking sound to the back wall, pressing my ear against the rough wood. And the wall felt hollow, not empty, but hollow in that way a breath feels when it's trapped inside someone else's chest. And before I could talk myself out of it, I shoved the dresser aside, knocking over a lamp that flickered like it was trying to warn me. And I found this thin line along the wall, a seam, almost invisible unless you were right up against it. And I slid my fingers into it, feeling splinters bite into my skin. But I kept pulling until the panel cracked open, and a rush of cold air rolled over me. Cold in a way that felt like it came from far underground. The kind of cold that has history, that's been there longer than anything human. And the space behind the wall wasn't a room exactly. It was more like a narrow passage that didn't make logical sense because it extended deeper than the actual structure of the cabin allowed. And the walls were covered in scratch marks, thousands of them, thin and vertical, like someone had been counting days. Days that stretched on way too long. Or maybe the markings weren't days at all. Maybe they were something else, something trying to communicate. And the deeper I leaned in, the louder the clicking became, like a fast rhythm echoing off stone. And I realized the floor of the passage wasn't dirt or wood. It was old tile, cracked and stained dark in places. And the smell drifting out was earthy and metallic. The kind of smell basements get when they've been forgotten for decades. And even though every part of my brain told me to back up, close the wall, leave the cabin, leave the forest, leave the whole state if necessary, my feet stepped forward anyway, like the air itself was pulling me inside, tugging at the edges of my clothes. And the moment I crossed that threshold, the clicking stopped, just stopped completely. And this absolute silence hit me, thick and suffocating, and I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until something on the floor made a soft shift, like fabric brushing over tile, and I froze, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. And that's when I saw it, a shape sitting in the corner, knees pulled to its chest, head bowed, unmoving except for this slow, deliberate breathing that matched perfectly with mine. Inhale for inhale, exhale for exhale, like it was syncing with me on purpose. And I whispered, barely audible, "Hello?" Because apparently that's my instinct in horrifying situations. Just politely greet the nightmare thing. And the shape lifted its head, and I felt my stomach drop because I recognized the movement before I recognized the face. And the face was mine, not the warped reflection from earlier, not distorted or stretched. No, this time it was exactly me. Every detail perfect, except for the eyes. The eyes were wrong, too still, too focused, too aware, like they'd been watching me longer than I'd been alive. And it didn't blink, didn't move, didn't flinch. It just stared. And after a few seconds it smiled, slow and deliberate, like it had been practicing, and in a voice that sounded like mine if it crawled out of a well. But it whispered, "Took you long enough." And I swear the whole passage tilted for a second as it started standing up, limbs unfolding like they hadn't been used in years. And I backed up, almost tripping, my hand hitting the wall behind me. But before I could bolt, it stepped into the little sliver of light coming from the cabin, and I saw something else. There were more scratch marks on its arms, the same thin vertical lines, except these weren't carved into the wall. They were carved into its skin, carved deep, like it had done it to itself, like it was marking something. And the worst part is that some of the I remember the first moment the road dipped into that forgotten village, the kind of place where the sky feels a little heavier and the air tastes like dusk held too long in someone's trembling hands. And as I drove past the rusted gate that marked the entrance, something in the shadow of the trees leaned just a little too close, as if checking whether I truly belonged here. And maybe a part of me already knew I didn't, but I kept going because the invitation had sounded urgent, almost pleading, and priests don't exactly get to pick which souls deserve comfort. And I admit, I was curious. Curious in the way you get when you know you shouldn't be. When something tells you to turn back, but you pretend the whisper in your head is only the wind brushing the window, even though the hollow wind here seemed too intentional to be nature. I parked in front of an abandoned chapel that looked like it had been stitched together with cracked stones and old grief. And as I stepped out, I could hear distant footsteps, even though nobody was around. And maybe that should have made me stop. But I've given last rites in war zones and basements darker than memory, so one quiet village wasn't going to scare me. Not yet. Inside, the stillness wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, and the cold corridor that led to the sanctuary seemed to breathe on its own. A long exhale of chilled breath that crept along the floor and made me tighten my coat a little, pretending it was just the weather, because denial is a warm thing, and I wasn't ready to let go of it. When I pushed open the chapel doors, the flicker of a pale lantern guided me toward the center where they had gathered. The family, if that's what you could call a silent procession of people, standing perfectly still, each one wearing the same white mask with no expression, no eye holes, no mouth, just a blank surface staring right back at me. And I swear something behind those masks was breathing, slow and heavy, the kind of breathing people do when they're not quite alive or not quite gone either. I tried breaking the ice with a soft greeting, something polite, something gentle, but the echo of my voice felt out of place here, almost rude, like I'd whispered during someone else's nightmare, and not a single one of them responded, not even a nod, not even the slightest tilt of a head, and I thought maybe they were grieving in an old tradition I wasn't familiar with, though a part of me kept staring at the edges of their masks, trying to see movement behind them, something, anything, but there was only stillness. A stillness so deep, it felt like the air itself had forgotten how to move. They led me wordlessly to the coffin resting near the altar, surrounded by broken pews and a few trembling candles that looked seconds away from giving up on the idea of light altogether. And as I approached, I noticed the grave soil still clinging to the wooden edges, as if it had been dug up recently. Too recently. The lid was half open, like they had been waiting specifically for me. And when I leaned in expecting the peaceful face of a young girl, I felt my stomach fold into itself because her eyes were open, wide and glassy, staring past me into something far darker than death. And though she didn't move, there was a fading heartbeat of warmth on her skin that should not have been there. Not even slightly. Not after hours. Not after a funeral notice sent before dawn. I whispered a small prayer, more for myself than for her, because the air around that coffin felt wrong, like standing too close to a secret. And when I turned to ask the family a question, every mask turned toward me in unison, slow, deliberate, like they were one body with many faces. And honestly, that was the moment I should have walked out, driven away, and pretended my invitation had gotten lost in the mail. But I'd come too far to pretend I wasn't terrified, and priests aren't supposed to run. So I steadied my breath and continued the rite. The ceremony felt endless, stretched thin like a sleepless hush laid over the entire room, and the candles dimmed each time I spoke, as if the words themselves were pulling the light away. And the family, God, the way they stood, unmoving, too still to be human, too quiet to be alive, and every minute their mass seemed just a little closer to me, like I imagined it, or maybe I didn't. And I tried not to look directly because something inside me said, you don't stare at things pretending to be people. When the final blessing left my lips, each candle went out in the same instant, as though someone had blown over the whole chapel from a single breath. And in the darkness, I heard it, a whisper not spoken in any human voice, soft and cold, sliding across the inside of my skull like a fingertip tracing bone, saying, you buried yourself, Father. And I felt every piece of warmth drain from my spine. I reached out blindly, searching for the coffin, the altar, anything real, but my hand brushed against a mask, one of theirs, and it was wet, like condensation from breathing behind it, except the surface was too cold to belong to anything alive. The air twisted, the floor shifted, and it felt like the chapel opened and swallowed itself, collapsing into a deeper layer of night. And maybe I screamed, or maybe I only thought I did, but the world snapped into silence as abruptly as a door slammed shut. I must have fallen or fainted, because when my eyes opened again, the first light of morning pushed through the cracks in the chapel roof, pale and exhausted, and I felt something tight around me, something wooden, something lined with fabric that smelled like old lilies and damp earth. And when I tried to move, my elbow hit a board right beside my face. Too close, much too close. And that was when I realized the truth sinking into my ribs like cold water. I was inside the coffin. I was lying where the girl had been, except the girl was no longer there. And as I pounded against the lid, desperate, shaking, praying for it to be a nightmare, I heard footsteps outside, slow, almost patient, and then a voice that sounded exactly like mine said, calm and steady, "It's done." And when the coffin lid opened, blinding me with light, I saw him, me, my face, my clothes, my quiet, tired eyes looking down at me with something like sympathy or hunger. I still don't know. He leaned in close, closer than breath, and whispered, "We begin again," before stepping back and letting the masked family gather around him like he'd always been the real priest, like I had always been the one meant to lie in this box. I tried to scream, to grab his arm, to pull myself out, but they lifted the coffin effortlessly, carrying me past the broken pews, down the cold corridor, toward the open earth waiting outside. And the last thing I saw before the lid came down again was my own silhouette walking ahead of them, steady and confident, like he'd rehearsed the role for years. As the coffin lowered and the thud of grave soil hit the lid above me, all I could think was that maybe the whisper last night had been right. Maybe I had buried myself long before I ever came to this place, long before the masks, long before the girl with open eyes. Maybe this village didn't steal me. Maybe it reflected me. And as the earth swallowed the last sliver of light, I felt the world tilt once more, as though the story wasn't ending but circling back, waiting, always waiting for someone else to make the same mistake I did. I don't know how to explain what waking up in that coffin did to my mind, because even long after the soil stopped shifting and the air thinned into that soft, suffocating quiet, something inside me refused to believe it was real. And maybe that's the only thing that kept me from losing myself entirely. The small, stubborn voice whispering that priests don't die in borrowed graves, that this was some hallucination brought on by exhaustion, though the truth felt far less forgiving, especially when the darkness around me began to move like it had its own breath. At some point, I must have lost consciousness again, because when I opened my eyes the second time, I wasn't in the coffin anymore, but lying on a cold stone floor inside the chapel, sunlight dripping through the broken ceiling in narrow beams. And for a second, I thought maybe they dug me up out of mercy, though the more realistic part of me knew mercy wasn't exactly something that blank masked family had shown much interest in. I tried sitting up, wincing as my spine popped like it had been folded inside a box, because, well, it had. And as I looked around, everything seemed a little too bright, like the world had been washed in a shade of yellow it wasn't made for. And maybe that's what happens when you come back from underneath the ground. Colors don't trust you anymore. The chapel was empty now. No masks, no coffin, no silent audience watching me, like I was the only human in the room. And I almost laughed. One of those brittle, cracking laughs people make when nothing makes sense and everything is terrifying, because there was a small comfort in being alone. Even though I knew being alone in a place like this was the kind of thing horror stories warn you never to want. I muttered something like, "Good morning, Father Michael. Welcome back to the land of the deeply confused," and dragged myself toward the doorway, half hoping the village had just vanished, which honestly would have been the most reasonable outcome at this point. Stepping outside, the entire village looked unchanged. Gray wooden houses, crooked fences swallowed by weeds, and that same still heaviness in the air, like time had taken a vacation and forgotten to tell the wind and it could keep moving. And every house felt like an eye staring at me from behind old curtains. I called out, gently at first, something like, "Hello, anyone here?" Because that's what priests do. We announce ourselves even when we're not sure if the people listening are exactly alive. But my voice came back to me in strange echoes, the kind that repeat a little too slow, like someone else was copying the sentence and trying to remember how a human speaks. Honestly, I should have stopped calling out after the first echo, but curiosity is persistent, and I've always been too polite for my own safety. So I walked down the dirt road toward the center of the village, noticing that every house had something hanging on its door, a white mask identical to the ones the family wore. Each turned slightly to the side as if listening for me. I kept walking, telling myself the masks were part of some tradition, that maybe this was a community that believed death had to be escorted by silence. And I tried laughing at my own ridiculous attempt to rationalize things, whispering, "Sure, Michael, normal villages nail faceless masks to their doors all the time. Perfectly reasonable." But the humor didn't stick, slipping off into the breeze that didn't quite exist. The only building that seemed alive was a small cottage at the far end of the village, its window emitting a faint orange glow, like someone inside was awake, warm, human. And I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it, the same way a lost child gravitates toward any sign of light, even if it's a fire. I knocked softly because you don't bang on doors in cursed villages. That's just basic survival etiquette. And after a moment that stretched a little too long, the door creaked open, just an inch, enough for a thin, wrinkled hand to appear and beckon me inside without a word. I hesitated, obviously, because stepping into unknown houses in quiet villages after waking up in a coffin isn't exactly something they teach in seminary. But something in the air nudged me forward, and the door closed with a dull thud behind me. The kind of sound that makes you wonder if you just entered a home or a trap. The woman, if woman was the right word, stood by the hearth, stirring something in a pot that smelled like herbs and old wood, and she didn't look at me even once, which somehow made the whole situation even worse. Without turning her head, she said in a voice that sounded like it had been borrowed from wind scraping over stone, "You were not meant to take her place." And that sentence alone almost made me walk right back out, because nothing good ever follows someone saying you took someone's place. But I stayed still, gripping the back of a chair because the room felt like it was leaning. I asked her what happened, who the masked people were, who the girl in the coffin was, and what she meant by saying I took her place. And she just let out this soft, tired hum, like someone remembering a sadness too large to explain, then finally spoke, slow and deliberate. "They do not bury the dead here, only the living who have drifted too close to the edge." And that sentence made something inside me go very cold, a kind of cold that felt older than fear. She pointed at the pot, and inside the swirling herbs, I saw something I shouldn't have seen. My face, or the version of me who walked away with the masked family, reflected like a memory stuck inside boiling water. Except he wasn't walking now. He was standing in the center of the village, looking toward the cottage, like he knew I was watching him. The woman whispered, "It wears your skin until you accept the role you were given." And I don't know whether I misunderstood or desperately wanted to misunderstand, because the idea that something out there was living as me more convincingly than I ever had made the room tilt again. I asked her how to stop it, how to reclaim whatever part of me had been stolen, and she finally turned her head, slowly revealing a face marked with deep scars, long and uneven like something with claws had once held her too tightly. And she said, "You cannot take back what you gave away freely," which made absolutely no sense until she added, "You entered the village willingly, that is the offering." And the moment she said it, the fire in the hearth flickered, sputtered, and went out entirely, plunging the room into dim orange darkness from the dying embers. I stepped back, not because of her, but because behind me I heard the sound of footsteps. My footsteps, perfectly timed, perfectly matched. And when I turned around, the door was open again, even though I hadn't heard it unlatch. And standing right outside was the other me, the one with my face, but eyes that weren't mine. Eyes too steady, too knowing. And he smiled with a softness that felt almost affectionate, before whispering something that froze every thought in my skull. "You should have stayed in the coffin, Father." And then he stepped inside the cottage, closing the door behind him with a calm finality, as if this time he wasn't planning on letting me walk away at all. I felt the room shrink the moment he stepped inside, the air tightening like it was trying to decide which one of us was the real intruder. And the strange thing was, he didn't look threatening at all, which somehow made everything worse. Because danger that screams at you is manageable, but danger that smiles softly and walks like it practiced being you in a mirror for years, that's a different kind of terror, the quiet kind that settles into your lungs. He didn't rush, didn't lunge, didn't even speak at first, just stood there with that calm expression, hands folded loosely in front of him, like he was about to offer a sermon. And the old woman didn't move either. Her scarred face turned down toward the dying embers, as if she'd already seen this scene before and knew exactly how it would go, which wasn't comforting. I managed to say something like, "What do you want?" even though my voice was trembling so hard it sounded like I was speaking through cracked glass, and he tilted his head, my head, in that familiar, thoughtful way I did when listening to confession, which was deeply unpleasant to witness from the outside, and replied, "To finish what you interrupted," in a tone so gentle it felt like mockery. I backed up until my shoulders hit the wall, and the wood felt too warm, almost pulsing, as if the house was listening, maybe even favoring him over me. And he stepped closer, moving with this eerie precision, like every step had already been rehearsed, and I whispered to the woman, "Can you help me?" But she just closed her eyes, slowly whispering, "Only one of you leaves the village," which was not the kind of guidance I was hoping for. He chuckled, not loudly but with this soft familiarity, like we were sharing an inside joke I didn't remember agreeing to, and said, "You were meant to take her place, Father, not walk away from it." And as he spoke, something about the room shifted, the shadows thickening in the corners, stretching, crawling across the floor like spilled ink moving with purpose. I realized staying in that cottage was a very quick route to becoming a ghost story myself, so I shoved the chair next to me into him. Not to hurt him, because honestly, I doubted I could, but to buy myself a split second to escape, and to my shock, he didn't resist. Didn't even react except for a slight tilt backwards, like he was humoring me, which somehow terrified me far more. I bolted for the door, nearly tripping over the uneven boards, and once I was outside, the cold hit me with a sharp bite, the kind that wakes up every nerve in your body, and the village looked different now. Not emptier, not darker, just aware, as if every window and every mask hanging on every door was watching me, leaning closer, waiting to see how the story played out. I didn't know where I was running. There were only crooked houses, silent porches, and the long, winding path leading back toward the woods. But anything was better than staying near the thing wearing my face, so I chose the woods, hoping the trees might do me the favor of blocking his line of sight, because at this point I was relying entirely on nature's pity. The forest swallowed me quickly, branches knitting overhead like they were trying to trap the sky out, the ground soft underfoot in a way that suggested old roots and forgotten graves. And every time I looked back, I expected to see him right behind me, walking without haste, the way someone walks when they believe the ending is already decided. I stumbled deeper, breathing hard, trying to keep quiet but failing miserably because desperation is loud, and I could hear faint footsteps behind me, not running, just following, steady as a heartbeat that wasn't mine, keeping perfect rhythm with the crunch of leaves under my boots. The deeper I went, the more the forest felt wrong, as if the trees were positioned too evenly, their trunks angled just slightly toward me, as though leaning in to listen to my panic, and the air smelled faintly of something metallic, old blood, or wet iron, I couldn't tell. And I whispered, "This is fine, totally fine, just running from my own face in a cursed forest, very normal priestly activity, because humor is a fragile shield, but I needed something to keep myself from collapsing." Eventually, I reached a clearing, small and circular, the kind that feels intentionally placed, and in the center stood a stone well so old it looked like it had grown out of the earth itself, covered in moss and symbols carved so faintly they looked like scars more than inscriptions. I approached slowly, drawn not by curiosity, but by a strange pull in the air, almost magnetic, and when I leaned over the edge, expecting only darkness, I saw water reflecting something I didn't want to see. Not my face, not his, but the girl from the coffin, her eyes open again, staring straight up at me from the bottom, as if she'd been waiting for me specifically. I stumbled back, heart pounding so violently it felt like it might burst through my ribs, and when I blinked, her image flickered and melted into ripples, leaving only dark water behind, but the impression of her stare stayed etched behind my eyes. That's when I heard him, My other self standing just beyond the tree line, his voice drifting into the clearing like a cold breeze, saying, "She chose you, Father, because you already belonged to the darkness long before you stepped into this village." And as he stepped forward, something about him changed. His posture, his expression, even the way the light touched his skin, as if the village itself had molded him into a sharper, more precise version of me. The version that didn't hesitate, didn't fear, didn't doubt. He reached out a hand, calm and patient, saying, "Come back and finish the burial." And for a moment, one terrifying, fragile moment, I felt something inside me lean toward him, like a thread pulling taut between us. Before I could react, the ground trembled beneath my feet, a deep shudder traveling up through the soil like something massive was stirring underground. And the old well behind me gave a low, resonant groan, as if the earth itself was waking up. He looked toward it, his expression finally shifting from confidence to something like irritation, and he whispered, "Not now?" as if scolding a disobedient pet. And then the well exploded, quietly, almost elegantly, sending up a wave of cold mist that rolled over the clearing like a living thing. And when the fog thinned just enough for me to see, he was no longer alone. Standing beside him was the girl from the coffin, alive, walking, eyes open and glowing faintly like embers in a dying fire. And she smiled at me with a softness that felt older than the village, older than death, and whispered, "You were never buried, not fully," just as the ground beneath my feet cracked open, dropping me into darkness that felt far deeper than any grave could ever reach. I felt the world fall away beneath my feet, not violently, not with the kind of sudden drop you'd expect from the earth splitting open, but slowly, too slowly, like the ground had been waiting for this moment and wanted me to feel every inch of descent. And for a terrifying few seconds, I wasn't sure if I was falling or floating, or just suspended in a darkness thick enough to hold me like tar. And the strangest part was that the air down there wasn't silent. It hummed, a low vibrating sound, like a deep choir made of voices that had forgotten how to sing but remembered how to mourn. And as I drifted downward, the darkness shifted around me like a living current, brushing against my skin in soft, cold waves, almost gentle, almost comforting, like it was trying to remind me I didn't need to panic, though my mind refused to accept the invitation. When my feet finally touched solid ground again, the surface beneath me felt cold and smooth, almost polished. And when I blinked, shapes began to emerge, faint at first, like memories trying to take a form. Columns, archways, long corridors disappearing into shadows, as if I'd landed in the ruins of a cathedral built underground, forgotten by the world above. I whispered, "Hello?" partly out of habit, partly because silence makes you do desperate things. And the sound of my voice didn't echo. It just got swallowed immediately, like the air didn't believe in carrying sound anymore. And that should have been my first clue that this place wasn't meant for the living. I began to walk, one slow step at a time, my hands brushing along the carved stone walls for balance, and the carvings under my fingers felt disturbingly warm, like they'd been touched recently by someone or something else. The more I walked, the clearer the carvings became, twisting vines and figures bent in prayer or agony. It was hard to tell which, but all of them seemed to have blank faces, as if someone had scraped the expressions off with a knife, leaving nothing but smooth stone where eyes and mouths should have been. And I tried to convince myself that I was imagining the slight pulsing beneath the surface, like the walls were breathing. Far ahead, I saw a dim glow, a soft, golden light that flickered gently like candlelight. And for a moment, I almost felt relieved. Light means warmth, light means life, right? But the closer I got, the more it felt like walking toward the inside of a nightmare that had been rehearsed for me long before I ever arrived. The corridor opened into a massive underground hall, ceiling lost in darkness. The floor lined with what looked like hundreds of small stone altars, each one holding a single trembling candle, their flames shivering like they were afraid of being seen. And as I walked through them, the air grew thicker, dense with a strange scent that reminded me of cold earth after rain, mixed with something metallic, something like old blood clinging to memory. In the center of the hall was a giant circular platform, carved to resemble a well, another well. And as I approached, my breath caught because standing at the edge, waiting as if he'd known I'd arrive here, was the other me, the echo of my face, my stance, my quiet posture, except now he looked older somehow, sharper around the edges, like the darkness had been sculpting him while I wandered lost. He smiled, not cruelly, just knowingly, and said, "You shouldn't have run, Father." And I felt a wave of frustration rise in me, enough to speak through the fear, saying, "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" And he tilted his head as though disappointed I still didn't understand, before replying, "You were chosen to carry what she could not." And as he stepped aside, I saw her, the girl from the coffin, standing behind him, eyes no longer glassy, but burning with a soft, pale fire. And she stepped forward with a grace that felt almost angelic, though it twisted something in my chest, because nothing born of graves should move that beautifully. She whispered, "This is where we begin and end," her voice echoing strangely inside my skull. And when she reached out her hand, the air between us shimmered like heat rising from asphalt, revealing faint visions. My arrival in the village, the masked family, the coffin, the lowering of the lid, moments that I thought I had lived but were now playing in reverse as if showing me something I'd missed. I saw myself entering the village not at dawn, but at dusk, carrying something wrapped in cloth, something I didn't remember holding, handing it to the masked family, their heads bowing in unison as they accepted it, and the girl whispering to me from behind the coffin lid, even though in my memory she never spoke. I stumbled back, shaking my head, saying, "No, that's not real. That didn't happen." But the other me stepped closer, gently placing a hand on my shoulder, and his touch was warm, horribly warm, the kind of warmth you feel when someone familiar touches you. And he whispered, "Memory is a fragile guest. It leaves when the house grows dark." And I felt something inside me crack, a deep, aching recognition that there was a hole in my past, something missing, something I had given up long before I ever walked into this village. The girl stepped closer, her eyes locking onto mine, and for a moment everything else faded. The candles, the hall, the other me, and I felt drawn into her stare, as though she was opening a door inside my mind, showing me something buried beneath years of denial. A church I once served in, a funeral I once refused to perform, a young girl whose family I turned away because their rituals felt too strange, too old, too unholy, and the guilt I buried so deeply that I convinced myself it never existed. Her voice echoed inside my head like a distant bell, saying, "We called you then, and you ignored us." And the air around me shivered, the candles flickering wildly as if reacting to her tone. The other me stepped behind her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders, and whispered, "She died waiting for your blessing." And suddenly everything made a terrible kind of sense. The invitation, the masks, the coffin, the burial, the reflection of me walking away. They weren't punishing me, they were replacing me, rewriting the version of me that failed her. I tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, but the words came out broken, because what do you say to the dead when they waited years for a confession you didn't know you owed? Before I could form a sentence, the floor beneath the platform began to crack, thin lines of light snaking outward like veins, and the girl reached for my hand, her expression softening, whispering, "But you can still choose." And for a moment, for a brief, fragile moment, I believed her, that maybe I could still walk away from this place whole. But then the other me leaned in, his breath cold against my ear as he whispered, "Only one of us walks out of here." And before I could react, the platform split open completely, revealing an endless pit of swirling darkness beneath us, pulling the candle's flames downward like a hungry tide. And as the ground gave way, the girl fell backward into the abyss, her hands slipping from mine, her eyes still locked on me with a look that felt far too human. And the other me grabbed my arm, not to save me, but to throw me in. And as the darkness swallowed both of us, I heard her voice rise from below, whispering one last thing in a tone that chilled the marrow in my bones. "Only the true one returns." I fell into the darkness and somehow landed on a surface that felt solid, but uneven, like stepping onto the back of a sleeping giant. And for a long moment, I couldn't see anything, only the faint pulse of cold air brushing against my skin, carrying whispers that I couldn't place. Not human, not entirely, but almost familiar, like the wind had learned to imitate voices it once heard. And I realized immediately that there was no floor here, not in the way floors exist in the world above, only a labyrinth of stone ledges, tunnels, and shadows that seemed to stretch forever. as if the village itself had extended underground into some infinite, breathing maze. I tried calling out, my voice trembling, sounding alien even to myself, and the echoes that returned weren't my own, but fractured, overlapping versions of me speaking in hushed tones, saying things I hadn't yet thought, things I might never have wanted to think. And the irony of arguing with my own reflections in the dark wasn't lost on me, though I had no courage left to laugh. Each step I took was measured, careful, because the shadows shifted slightly with each movement, sometimes revealing shapes that looked like figures frozen mid-motion, or perhaps trapped, their outlines blurred and trembling, eyes open wide, mouths too small or too large, staring at me without blinking. And I couldn't tell if they were warnings or invitations, or perhaps both, and the air itself carried a faint metallic tang, like wet iron, reminding me of soil disturbed too long ago, of graves dug too shallowly, of mistakes made that you cannot undo. I kept moving forward because staying in one place felt dangerous in a way I couldn't describe. Like inertia would allow the darkness to consume me more quickly. And somewhere ahead I saw a faint light, soft and flickering, like a candle struggling against a persistent wind. And I walked toward it, heart hammering against ribs that already felt cracked from the weight of fear. And as I drew closer, the shape of the light resolved into a small chamber, its walls carved with faces I didn't recognize, yet somehow felt intimate, as though the carvings were watching me, waiting for my reaction. And in the center stood a single figure, her, the girl from the coffin. But she wasn't the same. Her skin was paler than marble, eyes glowing faintly like embers that had burned for centuries. And she smiled at me, slowly, softly, in a way that made my chest ache and my stomach coil. Like recognition and terror had intertwined into a single living knot. I tried to speak, to ask why, to beg for understanding. But she raised a hand, small and precise, and her voice filled my mind instead of my ears, gentle but unyielding, whispering, "You chose to follow, you chose to see, and now you will remember." And with that, the walls began to shimmer, revealing visions not of me, but of others, priests, wanderers, lost souls, all arriving here at different times, drawn by curiosity, by duty, by mistakes, and each of them trapped in cycles I could feel spinning under my skin, repeating endlessly, sometimes awake, sometimes dreaming, never fully free. I stumbled back, fumbling against the uneven stone floor, and realized with a growing horror that my own reflection appeared in the shadows around me, not in mirrors, not in water, but embedded in the darkness itself, mimicking my every gesture, my every thought, my every heartbeat. And I understood then that the other me, the one in the village, had never left, had only been waiting, shaping, guiding me to this point, orchestrating the trap I now stood in. And worse, I knew he could see me just as clearly as I could see him, reading my fear like scripture. She stepped closer, and with each step, the shadows responded, rippling, forming corridors that I had to walk through, twisting back on themselves, forming impossible loops. And I began to understand the weight of the village, of the coffin, of the masks, of all the funerals I thought I had escaped, that there was a rhythm, a cycle, a secret pulse to this place. And the moment I tried to fight it, the corridors themselves seemed to push back, narrowing, closing in, whispering, "There is no outside, Father." And the soft, dry humor I tried to muster, imagining myself in some ridiculous adventure story, cracked like ice in my mouth. Somewhere deep, I felt the other me step closer, speaking directly into my mind, calm, patient, deadly calm. "Do you remember her face when you first saw her? Do you remember the coffin? Do you remember what it felt like to breathe in the darkness?" And I could, painfully, vividly, and with that memory came a terrible realization. I hadn't simply been chosen, I had been replaced, slowly, gently, surgically, until the version of me that walked outside the village with the sun on his shoulders was already a ghost, a shadow, a memory of mistakes. And yet I was here, fully conscious, fully aware, fully trapped. The girl raised both hands, and the shadows around me seemed to pulse, twisting into forms I can only describe as otherworldly, faceless figures pressing closer, whispering a language just beyond comprehension, teasing at the edges of sanity. And I staggered back, nearly losing my balance on a ledge that wasn't really a ledge, floating in some infinite dark nothing. and her eyes, glowing faintly, pierced into me as she whispered, "There are many who come here, Father, but only one returns as himself. The rest stay to teach the next." And then the other me appeared beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his smile calm, almost comforting, almost intimate. And I realized with a sudden, stomach-turning clarity that he wasn't trying to harm me. He was trying to complete the process, to finish the replacement, to fold me into the rhythm of the village that I thought I understood but never could. And the thought made my knees buckle because I wanted desperately to run, to climb, to fall, to scream, anything. But the air around me was thick with waiting, with patience, with inevitability. She stepped forward again, and this time her voice rang in my mind like a bell just over a grave. "Do you remember the night you refused? The one you turned away? The one that started it all?" And I did, and I shivered, because memory was no longer comforting but accusatory. And I realized that every choice I had made, every step I had taken, had led me to this moment. And in that instant, the other me extended a hand, not as a threat, but as a gesture of inevitability, of continuity, of an offer I could not refuse. And the shadows pressed closer, whispering, circling, pulsing with a rhythm I could feel in my chest. And I understood then that there was no escape, not truly, not ever, that perhaps the village, the coffin, the masks, the girl, the endless corridors had been waiting for me my entire life to make the wrong choice, to follow curiosity, to follow duty, to follow fear. And that only one question remained as I floated in the abyss of consciousness, heart hammering, mind spinning. Would I take his hand and become the next lesson for another wandering soul? Or would I resist and risk being forgotten entirely, swallowed by the darkness and the whispers, leaving the village, the girl, the other me, and the infinite shadows behind, knowing that maybe, just maybe, even in resistance, I was already part of the rhythm, already part of the cycle. And as I hovered there, suspended between decision and inevitability, her voice, soft, patient, chilling, whispered directly into my ear one last time. "Have you ever felt something at night that made you doubt reality? Or was it all in your mind?" And the shadows pulsed an answer, wrapping me in silence and expectation, leaving the rest to choice, or perhaps to fate.